Welcome to the 105. I'm Cooper Petagna. That's 24/7 Sports Director of Scouting Andrew Ivins. Drew, we are 2 weeks away from National Signing Day, and we talked about QB Armageddon on Monday. You can find that on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. A lot of things happening. A lot of things still happening, Drew. We got first-year head coaches with their first full-year cycle. We'll talk about those guys. Are they underachieving? Are they overachieving? Are they on schedule? We'll also talk about two jobs that could potentially be open. The rumors are swirling around Mac Brown at North Carolina, Gus Malzahn at Central Florida. And then, Drew, the question nowadays, I think we got to ask ourselves, is the group of five dead? 9 jobs already open in the group of five. But Drew, before we dive into that, Dabo Swinney, guess what? He's not happy. Here's what we got. Dabo Swinney, on the coming 105 roster limit, he was quoting as calling the change, quote unquote, terrible and the worst thing in my coaching career. Brent Venables, his former defensive coordinator, followed that up as well with the same sentiment, Drew. I'm assuming that all 133 FBS coaches will probably feel a very similar way that Dabo Swinney feels. But what's your thoughts on this as Dabo Swinney kind of fires back on the new legislation here?
Good to see the 3 letters 105 in the media, because I think some people will wonder, okay, they're called the 105. Why? It's because of that roster limitation. Cooper, how many walk-ons do you think Clemson currently has on their roster? It's 136 players, so you can do some quick math and figure this out.
I'm going to go with over 25.
They got 51, and Clemson playing last home game on Saturday, senior day. I think Dabo is going to walk, or 30 different players are going to be recognized. And that's because they have to trim down the roster, right? Only going to have room for potentially 20 walk-ons. And the SEC has already said their scholarship limit. It's going to be 85 moving forward. The ACC, the other conferences that haven't made the decision, so they could technically have 105 scholarship players as well. Cooper, I wrote about it a few months ago, just with some of these walk-ons, 0-star recruits that have turned into heroes on multi-million-dollar rosters. And I do think this is certainly notable. I mean, whoever can figure out the walk-on program and start treating it almost like a practice squad, right? We keep saying everything is shifting towards the NFL model. Whoever can use those 20 spots the best and get the right guys in the building, I think that's going to give you a huge advantage in the coming years. You're going to have to really kind of invest in scouting some guys, talking them into potentially getting some NIL money, right? And joining the program at a discount. Dan Jackson at Georgia, feels like we've talked about him a lot. Michael Taffy at Texas. I mean, those guys have delivered in key moments, and they were not signed out of high school. So it's easy to see why Dabo is pushing it back against this. I mean, Clemson's walk-ons have delivered over the years. That has been a staple of his program. And hey, Dabo's a former walk-on himself, walked on as a wide receiver there at Alabama.
Well, you bring up a good point. It's really interesting to see, all right, like what is the back end of that roster going to look like? Essentially 86 through 105, right? The walk-on program is fascinating in the way that these guys really, they don't count against your scholarship count initially when you take them on, right? So it's all upside in terms of what you can do. Now I wonder, when teams look at 86 through 105, are they going to go recruit a Dan Jackson, or are they going to recruit another guy that they say, hey, this would be a luxury to have in our class, and it's a high developmental upside type of player that they can put on their payroll and try to develop? But in the transfer portal era, Drew, you need those program players. You're going to need guys on your roster that are essentially the practice squad or the walk-on type of guys that have some type of connection to the university. So I'm kind of fascinated to see how much these programs really kind of shift in terms of what they're looking for and where those spots would go. And the other thing I got to mention, how terrible was I at math? There's only 85 scholarships, right? So obviously they have 50 plus walk-ons makes sense.
One more thing on this, just kind of thinking about this all morning. Hey, the quarterback position, right? Like kind of a practice squad quarterback, that's going to be so important. Think about it. Florida had to start Aiden Warner against Texas. He came in for DJ Lagway against Florida. Obviously, there was a ton of injuries, but we always talk about it. You're only really as good as your number 2 QB. And, if the injuries start to mount, you're going to have to play some other arms. Aiden Warner was a Yale transfer, walked on at Florida. you got to tip your cap to Billy Napier, and I think that position is going to be coveted as well. And then you're going to have to hold on to him, right? It's going to be like an undrafted free agent. Think about it. NFL teams can sign whoever they want off your practice squad. Again, college football getting closer and closer to the NFL.
I think that's going to be 1 year at a time when you see those third string quarterbacks, right? I mean, guys that would be an insurance policy, maybe looking for more playing time elsewhere. But I completely agree with you. That's going to be more of a valuable position maybe than we've thought in years past. All right, Drew, let's dive into some first-year head coaches and their first full year recruiting as well, and kind of getting the overview on that. The way we kind of decided to attack this was we were going to put them in 3 buckets, like I mentioned at the top of the show: overachieving, underachieving, or right on schedule. And Drew, I admit with a couple of these picks, I kind of was skewed a little bit one way, but I was back and forth between what I should do. But let's start with Jedd Fisch in Washington, a place I know pretty well. They're ranked number 18 right now. They have 27 commitments. Arizona, what he did when he was there, he did a tremendous job, Drew. But the headliners here: Za'Darius Rainey-Sale, Zach Tuskowski, the tackle, Dylan Robinson, Ryland Dillard-Allen. You have studied this class because I believe you have the Big Ten audit. And we also talked about this class on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel, where you can find the class breakdown there. But you got a pretty good feel for what these guys are doing.
Yeah, Coop, I got a question for you here. You were at Washington in 2019. You had a major role in that recruiting class, correct?
Correct.
Because when Jedd Fisch showed up in Seattle, he said, "Hey, we're going to sign the highest ranked recruiting class ever." Taking a shot right at you there. But how many NFL guys from that group? Puka Nacua, there's a lot, correct?
Puka Nacua, Trent McDuffie, Leatu Latu, Troy Fatanu, or a couple more in the 19 class. But hey, it's a good thing. Now here's the thing: is all else equal, they got 27 commits. They're at number 18. That UW class is top 15, had 23 commits, but hey, whatever you got to do. I like Jedd, and to me, somebody that loves the University of Washington. You and I have talked about this. I love the fact that he's aiming high. I think University of Washington can be hovering around this area, top 15 every year. I think under Jedd Fisch, they can break that barrier of a top 15 class at the highest ranked class in program history. And I feel like that's kind of like important for him. It's like a feather in the cap to kind of say, like, all right, we've taken the next step here.
Okay, well, any chance I can pump some air into your tires, because I think a lot of people are like, all right, what are these guys now? Hey, Cooper scouted, signed, brought those guys to Washington, helped them make the college football playoff. All right, Cooper, I wrote down here on schedule, and I think you can make a case for overachieving. And what's interesting about Jedd Fisch in this Washington recruiting class, you just said it's sitting at 18 right now. They got a lot of guys committed. Jedd Fisch got a late start to assembling this class. He wasn't hired till the second week of January. Normally how the recruiting calendar is set up now, that time in the winter months, it's not even about the seniors. You're out on the road recruiting the juniors or trying to get them on campus for junior days. So it has taken them a while to really get it rolling. We've seen some notable flips here over the fall months. To me, I love this class. I think they're getting it right on the offensive line. They're bringing in some playmakers at the wide receiver position. And then they got 2 quarterbacks committed. But I said on schedule because I think they're going to overachieve in 2026. Now that Jedd Fisch has had time to get his staff in place, they've had a chance to evaluate guys on the West Coast and really across the country. So for me, on schedule, Jedd Fisch, you look at his work at Arizona, right? A lot of 3-star guys with developmental upside that they've hit big on. So I think this is what I expected for him, but I think in 2026 is when they're going to have a chance to break what you did in 2019.
I agree with everything that you said. I think it's encouraging the fact that it's the first year. This is what he set out for. He wanted to be in this neighborhood. He wanted to have an opportunity to potentially break that record, so to speak. And here they are in 2025 with 27 commits and a flip here or a couple additions here or there. And all of a sudden you're back into that conversation. So Drew, for me, I'm going to go overachieving. I love what Jedd Fisch has done. I think I mentioned Arizona a few minutes ago because you look at Arizona, what he's done with that roster and the way that they flipped it on its head. I mean, this was a 1-win team when he took over in his first season, be able to flip that on its head, win double digits just a few years later. That says a lot about Jedfish, his staff, what they've done from a personnel standpoint, Drew. I'm excited about Washington. I actually think they're going to be a legit player. You add in a couple portal additions. I like what they've done from a staffing standpoint with the younger Belichick there as well on defense. I think UW's going to be a problem. We talked about Damon Williams on Monday. I like the way they're heading. Another team that they faced off against in the national championship last year is Michigan. I'm really, really interested to kind of see where you land here. Michigan ranked right now inside the top 15 with the number 14 ranked class. They only have 18 commitments, Drew. The caveat out here is that they're still in it for the number one player in the country, Bryce Underwood, only 20 minutes down the road, currently committed to LSU. We'll see what shakes there. But where do you feel like Michigan is kind of sitting year one under Sherrone Moore?
Underachieving is what I have written down here, Cooper. And that would have been a lot easier to say a few months ago. Now they've picked it up on the recruiting front. They flipped Shamari Earls over from Georgia. I've gotten a few other guys. And you mentioned it. It feels weird to say underachieving because this would be their highest ranked recruiting class in 3 years. And right, if you add Bryce Underwood into the fold, that gets them all the way up to number 9. That would be tied for their best finish in the past 5 years. And 5 years ago, that group is what helped them win the college football playoff. Andrew Babaloa, the 5-star offensive tackle, we talked about that at length throughout the cycle. That was a recruit that Sherrone Moore had to get. He got him in the boat. But the reason why I say underachieving here, Cooper, you guys just won the national title. It feels like they had this opportunity to really capitalize. I know Jim Harbaugh leaves. A ton of the people inside that building that helped win all those games are gone. So it's a new look staff. You got a bunch of new people in there. I just still expected a little bit more. The other thing, Cooper, they've been bitten by the decommitment bug. Ivan Taylor, he flips to Alabama. Nathaniel Marshall, he flips to Auburn. They also lost Phillip Wright to LSU, and they're not out of the water deep in just yet. I mean, Andrew Olesh, their prize tight end commit, he's looking pretty much at everyone. Andrew Marsh, the wide receiver out of Texas, just recently visited Washington. So I go back to the summer official visitors list. There was a lot of guys that I think fit the Michigan program. They didn't close on those individuals. So I like how it's finishing. And here's the biggest thing. What happens if they do not get Bryce Underwood? They had Carter Smith, committed quarterback that I think fits that program, gritty individual. He was all in on the Wolverines, was recruiting for them, face of the class. He decommits because he sees all the Bryce Underwood rumors, and now they could show up on signing day and not sign a prep arm, which is alarming given the current state of that quarterback room.
Well, I agree. I actually have a question for you. And we're doing these conference audits right now with 2 weeks left to go until signing day, obviously working in a pinch here. But Drew, I'm going through the SEC and I'm looking at these classes and I'm starting from the top and I'm working my way through. I'm through about 6 classes right now. And I think 6th or 7th ranked in the middle of that conference is Texas A&M. And they're sitting with a top 10 class. We're going to talk about them in a second. But in my head, I'm thinking you're comparing A&M to a team like Texas or a team like Auburn. And you're going through, and I guess it all depends on kind of flavor. But I'm sitting there talking to myself like, man, I think Texas A&M as one of the more complete classes in the country. And the reason I bring that up with Michigan is because you look at some of the pieces at the top, Drew, Babalola, Andrew Olesh, Shamari Earls, Andrew Marsh, Kainoa Winston, potentially being able to go out there and get a guy like Bryce Underwood. There's a lot to like. Now, I have not studied it in terms of the depth, but I kind of wonder, like, does that match the way that you feel about the top of the class? Can you go to the middle third, the bottom third, and are you going to feel the same way? And that's where I think Michigan was so good under Jim Harbaugh. And this is where I kind of feel like they're threading a needle here a little bit. How often can you go back to the well, live 12 through 20, and then expect to be a college football playoff contender? And I completely agree with you, which is one of the reasons that I did have them in the underachieving and not on schedule, and not by much. But Sherrone Moore, a first-year head coach, a young, dynamic personality is what you would think is what you're getting absent of Jim Harbaugh. You want to see these guys really getting after it. I mean, Michigan has everything that you could possibly desire to be a top 5, top 6 perennial program when it comes to recruiting, Drew, and they haven't gotten there. And this feels like more of the same. And I was okay with it because Jim Harbaugh is one of the best coaches in college football, and he had a track record of player development. I do not give that same grace to a Sharon Moore. It's what have you done for me lately? And you got to show me that you can do this. So sitting at 5-5, sitting at number 14 in the country, is it good enough? Yeah, maybe in the past. Is it good enough for Sharon Moore and company? I don't think so. That's kind of where I land here on this topic.
And last thing I'll say on Michigan, I do like what they have done in terms of kind of reconstructing the board. Really, with 2 months to go, it's a program where if you're dialed in like we are, you're watching these prospects, you're keeping tabs on your regions, you can tell that Michigan has made some senior season evaluations, right? They're not star chasing. They're looking for guys that are producing with the arrow pointing up heading into college. I think you do have to give them some credit there. Jamal Browder, wide receiver, they flip from NC State down in the state of Florida. They've been in on a few of those other individuals where, hey, to the untrained eye, all right, this doesn't mean anything. This is a plan B. But I do think that recruiting department has done a good job in terms of expanding the board, finding guys that you can win with, finding guys with developmental upside.
All right, let's talk about Texas A&M, Drew. They're ranked inside the top 10, number 9 right now. They have 21 commitments. Headliners, DJ Sanders, who we'll see at the All-American Bowl, Rashad Johnson from the Sunshine State, Keoti Armstrong, Kelshawn Johnson, Marco Jones. You can kind of go down the list here. A little bit of a different flavor than what we saw under Jimbo Fisher. Where do you have them?
I have them written down overachieving, and that's going to sound odd given that Texas A&M back in 2022 signed one of the highest ranked recruiting classes ever. I think it still holds the highest total on the 24/7 Sports Composite team rankings. I mean, Coop, when Mike Elko was hired, I think to the college football media and everyone, he wasn't viewed as this elite recruiter. And me and you kind of raised our hands and said, no, okay. At the top of the board, it might not be a bunch of 5-star prospects, but the back end of that class is where they're really going to make their money. And I think that has proven to be true. I think what's also notable about Texas A&M and where they are ranked, Elko steps into the Lone Star State where Steve Sarkisian just took the Longhorns to the college football playoff. He has things ripping and roaring on the recruiting front. And Texas A&M, this recruiting class, it has 15 in-state commits, right? Now, how many head-to-head battles have they won against Texas? A handful, not a ton. But I still think Mike Elko is kind of out kicking his coverage here. I thought it would take a little bit longer, but I really like what they've done. They've also gone into California, and I know they've lost Hassan Longstreet, the quarterback, but they got 3 other kids committed from there. And there's still some 5-stars in play. Lamont Rogers, the offensive tackle, committed to Missouri, who he's been linked to Texas A&M. Mike Roach at 24/7 Sports has his crystal ball on the Aggies. There's some smoke out there about Dijon Lee, the 5-star corner committed to Alabama. So I think they've done a good job. And Coop, they also got some pelts on the wall. Hey, Rashad Johnson, safety out of the Sunshine State. That was a kid committed to Georgia. Kirby Smart, they wanted that, big, rangy back 7 defender. Texas A&M is able to flip him. So I think it's very encouraging. And I think the class is better than I would have thought, if you had asked me 7-8 months ago.
Yeah, I have them on schedule because I think you and I have always talked about the potential of Texas A&M. I think the frustrating part, even as a national recruiting analyst, watching them, observing them over the last couple of years, Drew, what was it, 22, when they had the highest ranked class of all time? It was kind of hard to say at the time, but you see all this talent that they bring in, and then in the back of your head, you're like, yeah, it's an immense amount of talent, but do these guys really kind of fit the identity of who Texas A&M is trying to be, which led to the question, does Texas A&M even know who they're trying to be? All that is answered under Mike Elko. Mike Elko has an identity, what they want to do from a talent acquisition standpoint. And Drew, I couldn't be any more impressed. I keep bringing up that we're going through these cross checks right now, and Texas A&M was a team that I watched last night. And the majority of the time that I'm spending is on guys outside of the top 247. We can spend a lot of time on the Kelshawn Johnsons of the world. We can spend a lot of time on Keoti Armstrong and Marco Jones and how much we like those guys. But you go down the list, man, Tristan Norman, a guy from Alabama that I really like, a guy that's got developmental upside, going to be a number 3 receiver. I thought that was a savvy get. You look at their offensive line, Jonte Newman, Marcus Garcia, Tyler Thomas, Nelson McGuire was a late bloomer Connor Carty, all these guys from the state of Texas, position versatility, can play tackle, can move inside to guard. Drew, we talk about that position flex and why that's so valuable defensively. This kid, Chase Sims, quite honestly, I think he's got top 150 talent. We stumbled upon him late here, and I'm glad we do this exercise. But they have done some phenomenal evaluations in the state of Texas, outside of the state of Texas. Jamar Beal Goins from Arizona as well, Drew. Dejon Petaway, another guy. Like, if even the guys that you're poking holes in a little bit, like a guy like Petaway, yeah, maybe he's a little bit slight, but one of the most athletic players on the back end in the entire cycle. They just miss smart. All those things that we talked about. All right, what are you going to do with the back end? You look at A&M, a Landon Rink. What's he going to look like on Sundays? I don't know. Going to be a guy that's probably going to be an eventual starter on Saturday, going to give you a lot of depth there as well. A guy that was on your freaks list. Drew, you go down the list, and I guess the point that I'm trying to make is everything makes sense. You understand what they're doing with every single take, maybe outside of one or two guys. And objectively looking at that, to me, all that really tells me is it's going to be a team not only with the top tier talent, but if they play their cards right, which they have done, and geographically, this is important. This is going to be a team with a lot of depth here in the next 2 to 3 years.
Hey, not to get like super sidetracked from the conversation and what we're talking about here. One of my favorite parts of these class audits is when you kind of go through and you watch all the kids back to back to back, is identifying the individuals that are just going to be, or potentially faces of the program. Like you mentioned Landon Rink, weight room warrior. Like that's a guy to me that we're going to see 2-3 years down the line, face paint, standing there screaming on the sidelines. You can just kind of identify it. And I always love to put that in my notes. Like, this guy's going to be a media favorite. This guy's going to be a voice in the locker room. This guy's going to be, kind of the heart and soul of the program. And I do think that's important, right? You need to have some of those individuals. And if we can identify it on tape, certainly I would think the people on the coaching staff and inside the recruiting department as well, you have to get some of those individuals, especially in this player movement era.
All right, last one here. We'll stick in the SEC. Kalen DeBoer coming over from Washington, Alabama. I think we all were very curious about how this one was going to shake out. 2 weeks left till signing day, Drew. They've taken some blows. They're still ranked number 3 inside the top 5. They have 21 commitments. Headliners, 5-star quarterback Keelan Russell, number 1 interior offensive lineman in the country, and Michael Carroll, Dejon Lee, one of the best defensive backs in the country from California, Ty Haywood, Ivan Taylor, who they just flipped from Michigan. So, Drew, do you have them as a overachiever on schedule or underachieving?
I think I'm grading a little easy today. I have overachieving here. And Cooper, kind of what sparked this whole conversation, I was on CBS Sports HQ on Monday, and they asked me about Alabama after they lost top 247 running back Anthony Rogers. He opens his recruitment back up. Sounds like he likely is going to end up at Ohio State. And they're like, hey, Alabama's got 13 decommitments. And we've noted, hey, Nick Saban, I think the most ever under him was about 7. I don't think it was normally just 1 or 2 a cycle. Is there a reason to panic? And I kind of pushed back and I said, no, Alabama right now, number 3 in the rankings. And they just flip Ivan Taylor from Michigan. I think the biggest thing for DeBoer here down the stretch is he's going to have to play some defense. With that being said, when Kalen DeBoer was hired, he comes over from Washington. I had plenty of questions about him as a recruiter in the SEC. Was he going to be able to field a class that resembled the ones Nick Saban had built over the years, right? I mean, Alabama kind of got what Alabama wanted. And in-state recruiting has certainly struggled. But I do think this recruiting class has a ton of star power, and they've had to go outside of the SEC footprint to get it. They're in California, a ton of kids committed there. But Cooper, Kalen DeBoer, when he was at Washington, this is where his recruiting class is finished. 95th, 26th, and 41st. You look up right now, they're sitting number 3 in the rankings. We'll see where they finish. Again, have to play defense down the stretch. But I did not expect this from Kalen DeBoer, not in year 1. And I get it, the Alabama logo, it carries some weight, certainly with these kids. But there was certainly, I could have talked myself into a scenario where Alabama is sitting like 15th in the rankings, and they're not right now.
Yeah, they came out hot. And listen, you're going to pay Courtney Morgan that much money. This is what you would expect, right? And it's not all on Courtney. It's on Kalen DeBoer, that relationship. But They're under a microscope. It kind of felt similar to what LSU Brian Kelly went through when he came down from Notre Dame to LSU, and people said, well, he's never cut his teeth in the SEC. What is it going to look like? There's so much more urgency to say that, hey, I can handle this, I can do this at a high level. So I think year one, I don't want to say it's an outlier, but you expect them to kind of come out with a little bit of something to prove. Year two, year three, that, Drew, I think is going to be a little bit more of a test. Here's the thing that I find super fascinating. They only have 2 players from the state of Alabama in this class. Correct me if I'm wrong. Alabama's got to be, top 6 or 7 in terms of states per capita on draft picks, right? So you look at that, and then you look at Auburn, and not everything on the field is equal. We know that. Auburn has 11 players in their class from the state of Alabama. A lot of these guys playing early, Drew, that you look at. Sylvester Smith, Caleb Harris last year. They took 11 last year. And you think about that. And then you look at Alabama and you say, well, they got 7 guys from California. So my thing is, I just talked about Texas A&M. You talked about them having 15 players from the state of Texas. Alabama is not one of those states where you have to go outside and you got to start looking for different guys. Sure, you got to go head to head with the Auburns of the world, Drew. But out of the 15 players, the top 15 players ranked in the state of Alabama, I look back. I mean, there's probably 6 or 7 guys that I would say, okay, those are Alabama caliber prospects. Not everybody can play at Alabama, right? But there are 6, 7 guys that I think can play here. The guys that they walk away with, Micah DeBose, a former top 247 offensive lineman who struggled with his weight, now outside of the top 247, and Mal Waldrop, a legacy that's playing tackle, more than likely going to end up being a guard or a center and a program player. So it doesn't mean that you can't shop somewhere else and get talent like they've done in California. I just wonder, how sustainable is this year over year? And I know what you're going to say here. We kind of saw this with LSU going into the Midwest in their first year, and it was Jackson Howard, and it was they went after the Mickens kid who ended up going to Ohio State, and it's, what does that yielded for them, right? That's kind of something in the back of my head that I'm kind of thinking about here. Like, how long can they kind of get away with not shopping in Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, or the Southeast, where everybody really kind of gets their groceries from, if that makes sense?
I think you bring up a great point. Like, it's not sustainable. And how do you think Nick Saban, do you think he's kind of disgusted when he just sees, he pulls up the 24/7 sports rankings, goes to the state of Alabama and sees that Alabama A just 2 times? Like, he's probably not happy about that. And I looked it up per my research. Alabama 8th annually in NFL draft picks, 8.2 a year, the Yellowhammer State produces. No, Cooper, you're right. And it does remind me of Brian Kelly when he first got there at LSU. And we're kind of like, all right, what is this guy doing? I think the counterpoint to this, though, is, hey, USC hasn't built a fence around California. That would be the number 4 NFL draft pick producing state. So, hey, you can make the case that it is a little bit of opportunistic recruiting. And the other thing on Alabama, they got Keelan Russell committed, right? Our number 3 player. I think he's had the best season of all the quarterbacks inside the top 247. They got that guy. They flipped him from SMU. A lot of people are interested. That's one that can certainly mask maybe some deficiencies elsewhere.
It's just it's interesting to me because the transition class had 11 players from the state of Alabama. And you're looking at guys like Ryan Williams, Mbakwe, Red Morgan, all guys that have contributed early. I just kind of wonder, like, do they try to get back to that? Was this a one-off year where they felt like, hey, we had some relationships out west that we could take advantage of? Drew, the other thing here is, like, they're still battling down the line here for Dejoun Lee. It might be like one of those things where it's like, hey, I don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze, if we're going to have to go spend all our time out west and can't defend our own territories. So pretty interesting there. By the way, I had them on schedule for what it's worth. I don't know if I said that. Guys, just a reminder, 247sports.com is the place to be, especially with 2 weeks until National Signing Day. Wall-to-wall team coverage, recruiting rankings brought to you by yours truly. And transfer portal updates, that opens on December 9th, right around the corner. So this is it. college football recruiting. If you're a maniac about roster management, you want to keep up, you want to be ahead of the times, you want to impress your friends with football knowledge, this is the place to be, 247sports.com. And guys, just a reminder, we have Tom Loy, National Recruiting Analyst, in the chat answering all your questions. Tom, we appreciate you being here. So if you have some questions, especially recruiting questions, send those over to Tom. And if you have some questions for us, we'll try to get to those by the end of the show. Drew, some interesting talk about some jobs that could be open. We've heard speculation about North Carolina. Mac Brown, he's 73 years old. I mean, this is a ticking time bomb. UCF, Gus Malzahn, it's been a tough season for him, 59 years old, 3-5 this season. You and I were very optimistic about UCF going in the Big 12, and I don't think it's materialized at all. So I guess I'll phrase the question to you. What would be a better job, North Carolina or UCF?
I'm going to go with UCF here, Cooper. And I know you are going to highlight North Carolina. But to me, and what's interesting about both the Tar Heels and the Knights right now, and who knows what's going to happen, I thought John Bryce at Football Scoop had a great write-up, and he kind of outlined it when talking about some of these coaching searches that, hey, both of these guys could potentially retire. And then, Cooper, you look at their 2025 recruiting classes, both of them are sitting in the 60s with not a lot of guys committed. So to me, I'm going to write down UCF. And yeah, I'm based in Orlando, but I was there, Cooper, when they took on Coach Prime in Colorado early on in the season. I was on the sidelines. That school is hungry for a winner. They started off 3-0. Then it was a disaster, right? Loss after loss. Fan base seems to check out. But it's a young alumni base, Cooper. They're the third largest school when it comes to enrollment in the country. And I just don't think anyone has kind of set up shop and done it the right way. Yeah, Scott Frost has won some games. You know, Josh Heupel was there. He went on to Tennessee. But over the past 3 years, Cooper, UCF has had just one Floridian drafted. That means one player that played high school football in the state of Florida drafted. UCF, which is in the middle of the state. Florida produces 30 NFL draft prospects a season. Gus Malzahn, super heavy in the transfer portal this past cycle. You know, he's gotten some 4 stars committed. I think there's some cases where the Knights are chasing the stars a little bit more than they should have. No one has been like, hey, we're going to be a player development program. We're going to take, you know, the kids that, hey, maybe Florida State and Miami overlook, but these kids can play. These are the kids that go to the Big Ten and become all conference type of selection. So to me, I think UCF's a sleeping giant. I don't know who I would kind of tab as like the profile for the next head coach there. But I think in the new look Big 12, there's certainly a runway there to make a ton of noise.
All right. Can I throw some names at you? Late last night, 10:30, 11 o'clock, wiping my eyes, thinking about who could be a potential fit here. Let me throw some names at you in terms of UCF, Drew, and what I think. And some of these I say are OTB. That means outside the box, right? So I don't want anybody to screenshot this, put it on Twitter.
Is this like
without context?
Ray Lewis to FAU outside the box, or how weird are we getting?
There's one of those, maybe one or two of those that you might laugh at a little bit. But here's what I got for Central Florida here if we have the full screen. I got Jake Dickert from Washington State. I just think what they do offensively kind of matches what UCF has been able to point to in terms of say, all right, we've had some offensive success there. I mean, imagine a guy like John Mateer in that offense at UCF. The other names, G.J. Kinney at Texas State, kind of the same vibe. Alex Golish at South Florida. Charles Huff at Marshall, we've talked about before, is 7-3 this season. You want to get a little crazy, doubt this happens. Is there some chatter about Scott Frost? I don't know. John Gruden's talked about maybe getting in. Drew signed a contract with Barstool. I'm sure he'd rather be coaching right now, and that's no disrespect to anybody over there. I'm just saying John Gruden, guy loves ball, and it is fascinating to see in an NFL type of era that college football is shifting to. I mean, you could really allow this guy to coach. You talked about sitting there really kind of in the fourth position right now between Florida State, and Miami. Drew, Florida is number 2 in NFL draft picks, right behind Texas. I think it kind of depends on the year. How this is a great job. I'm not pushing back on anything you're saying. I think it is a sleeping giant, and I think it's going to be one of the more desired jobs in all of college football because there are so many different ways that you could attack it. You could say, all right, well, geographically, we're really just going to stay in the Sunshine State. The other part of this is if guys want to be closer to home and play in the Power Four, but they're not going to have a spot at Miami, they're not going to have a spot at Florida or Florida State. Well, we're a pretty good option as well, and you get to play Power Four football. Drew, the optionality there, they don't seem boxed in. This is one of those programs that when you and I talked about this a year or two ago when they were going into the Big 12, we got excited about what UCF could be, similar to the way that we talked about Texas A&M. It's all about having the right train conductor, and they haven't had that in quite some time. Now in the Big 12, Drew, in this day and age of college football, I think UCF, like, you get the right person in there with the right vision from a talent acquisition, and then from a scheme standpoint, sky's the limit.
Yeah, and the other thing too, I mean, Orlando is a major airport. Kids can fly in from wherever. People want to go to the theme parks. The other thing too, Cooper, I think if this job were to open up, there's a lot of assistant coaches, coordinators out there that are just kind of waiting for the opportunity. And we're going to talk about Group of Five football here in a little bit. But man, I think if it were to open, the desire, the demand, a lot of people are going to want that job because you can win. The facilities are there. The funding is there. Everything you need is there to win relatively early. And, you know, Gus has certainly done some good things in his time at UCF. They try to recruit Atlanta a little bit. They've had some good high school recruiting classes. I think what the issue they've ran into is it's too much on the transfer portal. Cooper, when I went to that Colorado UCF game, I think the Knights and their starting 22 had 18 transfers. Like, you are in the state of Florida. You can't have all these used parts from all around the country. No one has come in and said, all right, hey, we're not going to take the rejects. We're going to identify the guys that are slipping through the cracks, the guys that we do think we can develop, the guys that we do think we can win with. No one has done that at UCF. It wasn't Josh Heupel. It hasn't been Gus Malzahn. I think the opportunity is there for, like you said, someone that has the right vision. And I think you can get someone that has been around one of these programs, that has touched Kirby Smart, that has there's those guys out there. So that's why I'm with UCF here.
Any of those names fire you up in particular? Is there like one guy you're like, yeah, I could see that?
No, I mean, I don't know.
GJ Kinney doesn't fire you up?
Yeah, GJ, that one fires me up. And I remember when he was at UCF, was at a summer camp there. He's young. I think they need a guy with some energy.
I'm with you. All right, now
how about Galesh real quick, right? And I know USF hasn't met expectations from the national media this season, but I kind of do respect how much the Bulls focus on high school recruiting. Like, they invest a ton of time in that, and I think the dividends are starting to pay off.
He'd be an interesting one. I kind of wonder if I was Galesh, like, how does he view where he is now going into year 3 next year versus going to take over a program, in Orlando. I think the biggest thing is investment, Power 4 football, right? I mean, he'd be able to sell that in a lot different of a way. All right, Drew, the pitch for North Carolina, which I love. I love North Carolina. I think you and I have talked about this. There's certain jobs in college football, at least from a personnel standpoint, you look at and you're saying, wow, like, that place has a different gear, maybe than they even know that they are capable of reaching. Washington was one of those places when I went and worked there. North Carolina is a place that I look at. Virginia Tech is a place that I look at. TCU is a place that I look at. Stanford, believe it or not, they all kind of fit into these kind of unique categories. And the reason that I say that is North Carolina, Drew, being in the ACC and where they are geographically located. If I'm a coach looking at this job, I'm looking at Rhett Lashley and I'm looking at SMU, who transitioned from the American Athletic Conference to the ACC and has a pretty darn good shot of making the college football playoff in year 1. We can talk about Dabo Swinney. We can talk about Clemson. Are they any closer to a national championship? In my opinion, no. Whether they've regressed or whether they've plateaued, that can be a conversation within itself. NC State, expected them to take a step. That didn't happen. You look at Miami this year, obviously continuing to ascend. You look at Mike Norvell in Florida State. Who knows what that's going to look like in 2025? The point being is, from a recruiting standpoint, Drew, in my eyes, ACC is wide open, right? And we talked about North Carolina, and we talked about potentially being able to go down in the state of Florida, which would be accessible, Georgia, which would be accessible. North Carolina puts out more than 9 players over the last 5 years on average to the NFL. Maryland and the DMV, Tennessee, South Carolina. Drew, it is a very rich recruiting spot geographically that gives you access to a lot of different states that have a lot of different talent, that all of a sudden you look up and you can take a little piece here and a little piece there and a little piece here and a little piece there, dominate the state of North Carolina. And Drew, this is one of those programs that I think can really kind of course correct very quickly and is very, very capable of being a top 15 program in the country. And I truly believe that. I mean, you look back a couple years ago, I think they were ranked number 11 or 12 in the recruiting rankings. And you kind of see like, all right, when the gears are going, when there's juice, when there's vision, when there's execution, North Carolina is a scary program, can be a scary program. And there's no reason why they can't be a top of the ACC. Similar to what we said with UCF, you're going to need somebody that sees it, views it that way, and can sell that to the administration, can sell that to the people that are writing checks and say, hey, all it needs is this little push. In a weird way, it was kind of like Dan Lanning being the perfect guy for Oregon, saying everybody keeps leaving for all these other jobs, right? If you just stayed there and you built it out and you gave it the love and attention that you think it deserves, it can be a perennial power. Now, I'm not saying to that degree of what Lanning's been able to do in Eugene, but man, North Carolina with the right push, I'm 110% behind it. I'm sure there are going to be some people that push back on it. But I think this job can be a very, very sneaky good job.
Yeah, Coop, and you look at their current recruiting class right now, it's like you can tell they're just kind of drifting along. They've lost multiple players to other schools when it comes to flips, but I think right now just like 2 in-state commits. Damon June, a running back I like there, but they're just kind of floating. And you're seeing these other schools get into the Tar Heel state. Like I think Boston College is doing like a really, really nice job in North Carolina. So it's there for the taking. And I know the people that are inside that building, it's a difficult situation because everyone is talking about Mac Brown's future, and they got a good quarterback committed. No, I agree with you. Now, give me your list of candidates. Do you have one of those?
Let me see if I can fire you up here. Okay, I try to think differently here. This one is a little bit more established because this is the way that I would imagine North Carolina is going to be thinking. John Summerall, who, by the way, I think is going to have his pick of the litter in the next couple of years here of where he wants to go. Like if you're North Carolina, I'd be all over this. I think it's going to be hard to get him out of New Orleans. But man, you talk about a young, dynamic, kind of like ferocious, foaming at the mouth type of dude. Like this dude's got some stuff in the neck, man. I love John Summerall. Barry Odom, another one of those guys, bounced back with his second head coaching job at UNLV. Jeff Monken at Army has always kind of been rumored, linked to these type of jobs. That one would be interesting. Here's where it's different, Drew. This is what you said. It's harder for these guys to get jobs nowadays. Glenn Schumann. Okay, we don't talk about this guy a lot, but Dan Lanning really wasn't on my radar as a head coaching candidate either. He goes out, gets the Oregon job. You think about Glenn Schumann, he's been around. He's been on Kirby Smart's hip for God knows how long. I mean, his entire career. So he only knows how to do this one way. I look at that as an extreme advantage when you're looking at a guy like Glenn Schumann. All right, this guy from a program building, from a talent acquisition, what's it going to look like off field? That one would be really attractive to me. Drew, the other names here, Will Stein at Oregon, right? I think what he's done offensively there, as good of a resume as any. And then Pete Golding at Ole Miss would probably be a guy I'd call. But those are some pretty interesting names that I thought, all right, if I was North Carolina, these would probably be some guys that I'd want to talk to.
I love the Schumann one. On Will Stein, you're going to hear this here first, but as more, I think, or once the Power 4 jobs open up, I think he's a name that's going to be on a lot of message boards So I think there's a potential there that he could bring a quarterback with him, right? And I don't know, you read some of these searches, coordinator searches and whatnot, like fans are kind of looking for those type of guys. But no, Schumann that's the one. I agree. It's like Dan Lanning light.
Well, help me out here. I mean, there's Lanning, who's like the extreme example, right? First time head coach. But then you got Dillingham out there doing his thing at Arizona State, right? I mean, it kind of gives a little bit of life to these guys. And if you're North Carolina, like similar to how we talked about Colorado, like if I were them, I'm just in a total like why not mode. You know what I'm saying? Like, why not go take the shot? I'm not saying you got to go be careless with it. And I'm not saying that Schumann or Will Stein or one of those guys would be. But I think a calculated shot is in order, depending on what they've done the last couple of times. So we'll see there. Drew, I'm super intrigued with both those jobs if they do, in fact, open up. Guys, just a reminder, you're locked into the 105. You can find us every Monday and Wednesday. Monday on CBS Sports Network at 2 o'clock Eastern Time. Wednesday right here on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Make sure to like and subscribe in wherever you find your podcast. Also, leave a review and a rating on there if you don't mind as well. Guys, like I said, if you got some questions, now is the time to fire them in the chat. We'll try to get to those at the end of the show. Drew, you brought up something interesting yesterday when we were talking in our production meeting. You're just straight up said, is the group of five dead? Is it gone? And it made me think, why would Andrew ask such a question? Well, there's 9 jobs open already in the group of 5. And I thought, all right, well, maybe we do need to take a look at this. I mean, you think about these jobs, Drew. Mike New, Ball State, Biff Poggi at Charlotte, Mike Houston, East Carolina, your guy, Tom Herman, FAU, Brian Bohannon, Mike Bloom, Green, Will Hall, Stan Drayton, Don Brown. Drew, I mean, it's the axe has come early, unfortunately, in the group of 5. But tell me what you're just kind of thinking here overall in terms of maybe a little bit of a troubling trend of what you're seeing in the group of 5.
Yeah, I think this is the transfer portal. This is name, image, and likeness kind of rearing its nasty side, Cooper. I think it's getting so hard to win at the group of 5 level. And I think the transfer portal is a dangerous drug. And you look at each one of these programs, and obviously I'm pretty versed in Florida Atlantic, but I think of those 9 schools up there, we'll toss Kennesaw State out. They're moving up from FCS to FBS. So of those 8, I think 7 of them started a transfer quarterback here at the beginning of the 2024 season. And Cooper, the more I've kind of marinated on this, I think that is, going the transfer route with these quarterbacks, it can sink the program if you pick the wrong guy. And I went and I looked. All right, Cooper, how many quarterbacks do you think that have transferred down from a P4 to a G5 have gone on to get drafted in the past, 5 years? Can you name one?
I can't name one off the top of my. I would say it's probably 2 or 3 at most.
It's 2. One of them's your guy, Jake Haener, there with the New Orleans Saints. You also got Malik Willis. But why do I think it starts with the quarterback position? Okay. These group of 5 programs, they have very limited collective funding from the name, image, and likeness. And when you go out and you get these guys that, he was an Elite 11 finalist, or, he's a former 4-star recruit, they demand a sizable chunk of your budget when it comes to what you have. And if it doesn't work out, it's like, okay, it's like missing on a day 1, day 2 draft pick. I mean, it's detrimental to your franchise. And the other thing is you look at the 2 top G5 programs out there right now, Boise State, Tulane, both of them start quarterbacks that were signed from the high school ranks, and both of them have star running backs that came from the high school ranks. Obviously, one of them, Ashton Genty, in the Heisman Trophy conversation. So it's just kind of recalibrating how I think about group of 5 football, Cooper. And again, I'm very versed on what's gone on at Florida Atlantic. I think Tom Herman arrived without much of a plan, decided, hey, I'm going to go into the transfer portal. A lot of the transfers that FAU brought in here for year 2 didn't work out. I mean, you look at that offense, it looked like it was just a collection of players with no vision. And I think for whoever takes over at these group of 5 programs, you need to arrive from the jump and really invest in not only high school recruiting, but player development, because there's usually a reason why these guys are in the transfer portal. And remember, you only get this like 15-day window, right? When you can bring these guys in, you're bringing them in on official visits. You're not vetting the character. So I guess bottom line, I think it's getting really, really hard in this current landscape to win at the group of 5 level. Very hard.
Yeah, and to tack onto that, what's funny is, I'm overseeing the transfer portal rankings this year, as you know. But you start to dig in on some of these guys. You watch the tape initially, and you're like, all right, the tape pops. You read in a little bit of the background history of the player, and you're like, okay, they're highly touted. And then you start doing your homework, right? Whether it's injury history, whether it's character background, you start making calls, and you got to take a little bit of it with a grain of salt. But you start to fill in the blanks, and you start to really kind of get all the puzzle pieces to the story. And then, like you said, Drew, a lot of it are highly touted players, and why aren't they on the field? And you see flashes. There's a player that jumped in recently, had over 100 snaps, and see flashes of what he can be. And you're saying, well, why isn't he playing consistently? And then you get the background on the player, and it's hard to say, all right, I'm gonna bet on that player going forward. And you're right. Like, you're at FAU. Those are all the guys you're trying to take. How do you manage that locker room? How do you manage that timeline of guys that want to go in, make an impact early, and if it doesn't work out, then you got a chance of things going south quickly. So I think these group of 5 jobs are very difficult. And you brought up 2 kind of interesting examples. Tulane and Boise, at least where they are right now, it seemed like John Summerall is just taking the baton from Willie Fritz and continue to just build on what he's already established, which they've done a tremendous job in Louisiana and Texas in the South, finding the guys that have been really just kind of glossed over at the Power 4 level, but still have redeeming traits, building their team as a Power 4 team would through the high school ranks and supplementing via transfer portal. Guys like Mario Williams coming over as well. They brought in Ty Thompson from Oregon. They thought he was going to be the guy. When you have a guy like Darian Mensah, they signed out of California, who we had a low 3-star rating on. It makes everything easier, right? Malachi Nelson, Boise State, they brought him in to be the guys. Max Matson, 5'10.5", right? There's luxuries of being at group of 5 schools where people don't expect your quarterback position to look and feel a certain way. So maybe you should take advantage of that at other positions. I just find it kind of fascinating. I think it's a good point. I feel like it's too early for me to kind of wrap my head around, like, what's the correlation between the portal and 9 G5s getting axed in the middle of November, but there is something there. I'm not pushing back on it. I'm just kind of like, it's all happening very quickly, which is how I feel this thing goes. Everything happens fast, and you really don't have time to react.
Yeah, or calibrate or get a plan. And I'm not saying I have the answer here, Cooper. I just think, again, transfer portal at that level, very dangerous drug. As soon as you take it, you got to keep supplementing it and fill that way. And Tom Herman, Biff Poggi, both those guys got 22 games to win, right? And I don't know, if I was one of the group of 5 programs, you just talked about Glenn Schumann, right? And him being touched by Kirby Smart and working there and seeing that operation, I would be trying to find someone from one of these college football playoff contenders, a position coach, a Todd Hartley, a Cortez Hankton, a Todd Monken, or, one of these guys, James Coley, like one of these guys that has been around it, seen how it's done, and try to implement that at the G5 level. And I'm not saying don't take transfers, but I don't think that can be the spine of your roster, because it's very, very hard to manage.
Well, I agree. What I think is interesting about the portal is there's 2 degrees. And if you go in full in on the portal, you either win and you get more investment from the people that are floating the bill, or you lose and you're out. And it's kind of interesting with Colorado. I'm very fascinated to see what Colorado looks like post Shador, post Travis Hunter. Not taking anything away from them. They've done a phenomenal job at the skill spot, what they've done defensively as well. What does it look like after that, right? So a lot of case studies out there, I guess, in terms of the portal and what works and what doesn't work. And a lot of people have opinions on that. All right, Drew, we're going to take one viewer question, then we're going to get out of here. Canes Cats 305, Canes Cats Heat 305, Canes Cat Heat 305. Happy Thanksgiving, man. You're the best fan out there, just so consistent on with us every show. He says, question to Andrew and Coop, are you able to evaluate the it factor, the IT factor on film, or do you have to see the kid on Fridays interacting with his teammates leading? That's a great question, Drew. And I got to admit, I saw this in the chat probably 5 minutes before you did. So maybe I'll take a swing here as you started to come up with your thoughts. The first guy I thought about was Keelan Russell when this question came up. And I think, yes, you can see the it factor on tape. I think when you get excited about a player, not so much the physical traits, but the consistency of playmaking. Keelan Russell almost, when you turn on the tape, and I'm just using him as an example, there's other guys, but you come to expect it. Similar to a way with like Cam Ward, like you get numb to the playmaking ability. You just say, oh, this is what this guy does. This team's down by 17 points. This guy's going to put on a cape and he's going to lead them back to victory. And 9 out of 10 times that happens. I think the other part is you get further validated when you're at an event like the Elite 11. And Drew, I don't even know where we had Keelan at the time. I think he was top 64 when we were going into that event, so a guy that we liked, but he wasn't the 5-star player at that time. I believe I could be wrong there. But you get to see around him, you get to see the confidence, you get to see that he just kind of, this stuff matters to him. He wants to be great. He wants to be competitive. He wants to win. But he wants to do all those things because that's the way that he's wired. It's not important to him to go win the Elite 11 to make sure that he's got one more accolade that he can put on his shelf. He just wants to win at everything that he does. So that it factor, it's funny. It's not like an objective thing. It's what you said when you asked the question. It's like a subjective. Like you feel it. You just feel like, all right, this dude's got something that I cannot explain that separates him. And you can feel it in person, and the more tape you watch, it should be more and more obvious.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like maybe hard to follow, like find it on a highlight tape. But when you watch these guys full games, I think Keelan one's a great example. It's like he just does stuff where it's like he's a magician back there, like a dancer. And had a couple emails today about a national award, and Keelan's name came up, and I was like, look, just put on the St. Francis tape and you'll see it, right? How he gets out of it. And what's interesting, and I'm not trying to put this other quarterback down because I like him a lot. St. Francis played Duncanville, Keelan Russell running for his life, making all these plays. And then St. Francis plays IMG Academy, which has, a Power 4 offensive line, all these playmakers. Ty Hawkins is back there. They don't score a touchdown, right? And there's just a different factor in terms of like, okay, these guys pressure, how they get the ball out, that internal clock, the playmaking ability. So I think it shows up in that sense. But Cooper, the biggest thing, like, hey, we're not going to get around all these guys. We certainly are not. Hopefully, a lot of cases we get them at the All-American Bowl. Sometimes we get them at the Under Armour game. The off-season circuit's big. Like those are really, I think, important. All right, is this guy at the front of the line? How's this guy wired? I mean, all right, Jeremiah Smith. Like Jeremiah Smith had nothing to gain playing in the All-American Bowl last year, right? And do you remember him in that joint practice like on Wednesday? I mean, the dude was out there catching everything, and he goes on to score in a game. So you said it, kind of how they're wired between the ears. I think the other thing too, all right, like, are they a multi-sport kid? Is this kid running down the court and slamming it? Is this kid have like a bunch of blocks on his highlight reel? Like those are some other things that, you can look for. And again, we're not going to have the entire picture on everyone, but you want to see that competitive nature. I think Coy Parrish is another kind of great example. Cooper shows up to the All-American Bowl. We're calling him Koi Pond after the first 2 practices because he was a fish out of water, right? He had no idea what he was doing. All of a sudden it clicks, MVP of the game. Now he's, I think, one of the highest graded safeties, regardless of class in all of college football, according to PFF. You can kind of see it. And I think you saw that on tape as well. 3-phase impact player. So that's a great question.
Yeah, I think the last thing I'll say, I thought about Ryan Williams. I think about what those guys have in common. There's like a humble arrogance to them. They are not fazed by anything. They don't fear anything. I think about Ryan Williams being 16 when he showed up at the Under Armour game in Alabama, Mississippi, and he was the best player there. Just another day for him. Like that was just kind of the expectation. And he wasn't throwing it in anybody's face. He wasn't loud about it. he just kind of went about his business. And I think Drew's example about Jeremiah Smith is nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about Jeremiah Smith showing up to All-American Bowl and just going out and going about his business. And Drew, he didn't really have a good game by Jeremiah Smith's standards, super quiet in the All-American Bowl.
He scored the opening touchdown of the game.
I don't know what game I was calling there. I think he only had
he had 3 catches. But here's what no one talks about. TJ Moore ate that game, and I've kind of went back and watched some clips of it. I don't know who was on the East or the West. I mean, I'm assuming both these guys are on the East, but like the West bracketed Jeremiah after the opening touchdown, and that allowed for TJ Moore to kind of cook.
High level stuff there.
Yeah, TJ Moore probably owes Jeremiah Smith, I don't know, something.
TJ Moore was having a hell of a game there. Guys, we appreciate you joining us as always. We will be back Monday, CBS Sports Network, 2 o'clock Eastern. Tom Loy will be filling in for me as we slowly approach National Signing Day. And then we will have an audio pod for Wednesday, which we're fired up. Going back to our roots, Drew. That kind of fires me up, gasses me up. Going to be a good pod there. I'm looking forward to it. We'll preview National Signing Day.
This is all pending I'm not at the hospital, so
that is true. That is true. We could have a baby on the way. We could have our first 105 baby, which we're excited about. Thoughts and prayers to Drew and his wife, which we are very pumped. Right around the corner, Drew. How you feeling, by the way? Well, vibe.
I'm ready, man, dude. I'm excited. I'm
excited for you. Going to be a great dad. It's going to be, the baby's going to be pumped up, ready for the 2048 top 247. I think that's it. I was doing that in my head. I think it's like 2045, 2048, top 247. But we'll get out of there on that, guys. Appreciate it as always. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to like and subscribe as always, and we'll see you next Monday.